Welcome to Honoring the Honorable, a podcast of Seven Oaks Classical School where I, your host, Dr. Shipp, interview members of our school community. Join us as we talk about the work we do with those who do it. The contributions vary, but each is worthy of honor. Well, welcome to another episode of Honoring the Honorable, and today we have a special guest with us, Caleb Duplain. So, a bit about this. This seems to be stacking up to be a year of a number of firsts. One of the firsts that we have is this new series we're starting. We're calling it the Lyceum. Mr. Battaglia, I'm going to put you on the spot. Why the name the Lyceum?
Yeah, we initiated this kind of thinking about how do we touch point incorporating the sort of ancient world wisdom, ideas that we know to be true within classical education, and also being influenced by the sort of modern science discoveries that are actually supporting the sort of ancient wisdom that we knew to be true for many ages. And so one thing that we wanted to do to offer our community is get a sense for bringing someone from the outside in and just speaking and kind of showing not only to our student body but also to our parent community these sort of discoveries, these realities, what we knew to be true and what science is now sort of, if you will, has finally arrived to start the game.
Okay. Modern science and technology meets ancient wisdom. And that brings us to you, Caleb. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
As of lately, over the past few years, I think people have really come to know me for just the discussions I have around social media use, especially for young people, because I think it's challenging for a lot of reasons and ways that I'm sure we'll get into. But this all started, I think, when I was 12. I used my dad's laptop and illegally downloaded video editing software of like the highest caliber and taught myself how to use it, which led to me out of high school taking film classes and starting a video production company, and then realizing in my entering my early 20s, that I was a part of this whole social media system that utilized AI and video just for the sake of gaining people's attention, essentially. And that obviously comes with a lot of challenges and problems.
Now, I think if I understand correctly from just a little bit of conversation we've had, there's an almost funny irony to some of the work that you've done.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of a social media crusader who uses social media as a tool in your crusade against abuses of social media.
Do you want me to say the way I say it in the talk?
You know, you should probably say it because I think it can be said a lot more smoothly than what I just attempted.
There is a literal slide in the presentation, even the ones that I give to the kids, where I say, so basically, I am the anti-social media influencer who talks about how much time we waste on social media.
That's
and
incredible.
The irony of that is not lost on me.
All right, so, I think you'd kind of have to have your head under a rock, not to say that your topic that you're bringing to our community is a very relevant one. Virtually all the young people in a school like ours or virtually any other school either have direct experience with social media or feel like their life has been impacted or their friends' lives have been impacted significantly by social media. I wonder if you can kind of give us a little bit of a quick synopsis of the sort of points that you're hoping you can get across to our families.
Yeah. Well, it starts with the kids, obviously. I think the point I really want to get across to the kids is I think everybody has this idea that they are unaffected, that they are above average, let's say, or that, social media couldn't possibly use me in a way that I am not in control of. But one thing that is true is there are some things on us in our human psychology that just work, whether you know it or not. I'm sure a lot of us have seen like the joke meme photos of like people type out a sentence in a certain way that proves like you didn't even realize there was a typo, but there is. Like the simple reality is our minds can be tricked. And that's the angle of the talk I try and have with the kids is like not only are you susceptible to this just in your daily life, but on top of that, these companies that have only existed for a couple of decades pour billions of dollars and so many people and resources and time into keeping it. They're very good at keeping it. Basically using your human biology against you to make you have to constantly check in. And then once you do check in and once you are there, they're so good at keeping you there for longer than you anticipate being there. And that obviously comes with a lot of issues, especially for young people. Like they're already in the most challenging aspect of their life as far as understanding themselves and other people and communicating. And now you filter that through the lens of like these gamified and like highly pressurized and intentionally design platforms that make it even more difficult. And on top of that, it's like communication is only 7% the words we use. The most of it is in our tone, it's in our hand gestures, facial gestures, expressions, things like that. And so what you start with is what feels like communication, but in reality is just assuming what people are saying. And you have basically every teen in the world dealing with that, and nobody really caring so much to help them with it or, fight for them in their best interests.
Yeah, so this raises a question. There's a power to names, and I think part of the power of Facebook early on is that you have friends, right? And we call this social media. I think I hear you questioning how social media is, or how rich of a quality of friendship, the friends of friendship of Facebook or something like that is. Is that right, or do you have follow-on thoughts?
Yeah, I mean but it's funny because that's all accurate and fair to say, but that's also only one issue of many that people face, right? Quality of friendships is only one challenging aspect of social media. There's also the fact that you spend 2 hours on it without even realizing. Couldn't even tell me what you were doing when you were scrolling on social media 10 minutes later. You can't even remember a video that you watched, let alone getting into algorithms and algorithmically how it's designed for the sake of keeping your attention, and how that affects kids and how that affects political ideologies, whether you're 10 years old or 80 years old. Everyone is affected by that. But again, kids being particularly susceptible, number one, because now it's normal for them to just grow up with it and it feel like it's always been around, which it hasn't. And number two, just because, and why should they? They don't have the awareness that it could actually be designed against their best interests, and that without the human interest in mind.
You can imagine someone saying, look, it's my life. This is what I find fun. Quite honestly, my digital reality is more pleasant than my reality itself. So, what's the problem here?
That's one thing I always talk about with the kids. It's actually a common question I get in kind of the same vein as a question I get from the kids. It's okay, well, how much is the right time to spend on social media? Okay. It's okay, but there's no one answer, right? It's at whatever point playing video games or social media stops being you using technology and it turns into technology using you, at whatever point you feel like you are no longer in control, that is the right amount of time to stop using it, which is typically happens a lot quicker than we're willing to admit.
Well, yeah, so this is an interesting angle. I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is what we often do, feeling like we've chosen it. To some extent, you're suggesting really smart people have figured out how to kind of co-opt this or hijack us into wanting something that's really in their interest.
Yeah, and I want to make the point too, technology isn't necessarily bad, and those people aren't bad. Yeah. But at the end of the day, Facebook's priority, as an example, any of them, you could put any name in here for any social media app, but let's use Facebook. Facebook makes its money by you being on the platform. It's an attention game. It's the only thing besides perhaps drug dealers that call their main customer base users.
Wow.
And that's simply due to the fact that they continue to make money off of your prolonged exposure and essentially trading your time for selling advertisements. So, of course, if they have this obligation as a company quarterly to be growing, not to be neutral, but to be in a growth aspect, it makes perfect sense why over the past 2 decades social media has become so relevant, because where maybe before they were only required to hold you for a couple minutes, now their goal is to keep you for 30 or an hour or longer if they can. So just considering how much money and time and resources, not because they're evil, but because that is their prerogative and their priority, it's just asking that question of is this designed in the human best interest or in technology's best interest? Yeah.
And I suppose part of the focus here at the school is not just the human best interest, but the child's best interest. Yeah. As a category among human beings. That's good. So, I wonder how you kind of fell into this work. So you gave us a little bit of your backstory. You started making videos, and then you started to feel like you were part of some kind of system. But I wonder if you'd say just a little bit more about how you come to be, all right, the guy going out to the school to help us just become a little bit more aware of the way this industry works.
Yeah, it's funny because I forget where I heard it, but I remember somebody saying, like, if you need to figure out what to make online or what to share, consider like where everybody who follows you is at. Like, consider where your friends and family are at and what they need to hear. And the immediate thing, knowing all of my friends, is like, okay, we all spend too much time on our phones. And so I kind of like, I just made one video. I forget even what it was. I think it was something along the lines of, hey, you're scrolling right now. Like, I don't know if that's what you want to do. And then I was really into bonsai at the time. I had this like little bonsai tree. And so I was like, but anyways, here's this like cool little bonsai tree, like check it out. And then at the end I was like, okay, well, yeah, if you are done scrolling, maybe, take a break for a little while and step away. That video didn't blow up particularly, but I remember I was working on a documentary film set at the time. And I went on set and the makeup artist came up to me afterwards and was like, hey, I saw your video that you put up with the like tree thing last night. Like, that was really cool. Like, you should keep making that. That was like really neat. And I was like, huh, okay, so this definitely works. People are very receptive to this, and this feels important to people. And I know for myself, it was social media and video games especially have always been a huge challenge as far as how I spend my time. I made another one, and then the third video over the course of one evening got over 1 million views. And it was just kind of the same format of like, hey, let's take a break for a little while. But this one really resonated with people, like young people. I'd say age range 13 to 24 was like the main demographic. And everybody in the comments being like, man, I struggle so much with this. Like, how do I stop? Young people literally do not know how to stop doing this and are like publicly commenting how much they struggle with it. And then it became a much bigger question of, well, how am I struggling with this? Like, ironically, in making these videos, I'm now spending like triple the time I used to on social media, and I didn't even like it then. So it's like this huge snowballing, ironic situation I put myself in. And yet again, ironically, like the way that Social Awakening, the organization who hosts a lot of these events or organizes them, found me was through somebody connecting with one of those videos and understanding it and sending it to the owner of that organization.
I am interested in this sort of, we were talking a little over lunch, this collective action problem. You said you participated in an irony, but it sounds like a lot of other people do too, right? They're confessing on social media how difficult it is to get off social media.
Yeah.
But part of the problem is the everybody's doing it thing, right? If you suddenly are the person who's not connected in the same way, or you're not watching some of the same videos and you can't comment on them when the friends are commenting, you can start to feel left out really quickly. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how to begin addressing that kind of collective action problem.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
I think what's interesting is like, this is a point that Max, the founder of the organization, speaks about. What makes social media so hard is the very positive things that we get out of it is also the thing that gets gamified and like put behind a wall of how much time they need us to spend on it before we get that variable reward. Like this same idea by which slot machines are designed, that at some point you'll win, you're just not sure how big or when. And so biologically, it becomes very easy for that to become dangerously addicting, that mechanism of constantly pressing the button or pulling the lever or scrolling your thumb 2 inches until you find what you're looking for. That also comes back to the idea of it's not evil. It's just like it accomplishes things that are good. There are reasons it exists that it would be almost silly to suggest at this point that we could live without. But again, it's like because of the system and how it's designed, it is not built in a way that is in our human interest. Yeah. And it's unfortunate too, because another great point Max often makes that I think about a lot is like Facebook, these organizations, they have the data and the power to make this an incredible thing. Think about how scary all the data it is that they have on us. Like people talk about, that phenomenon where you like say something around your phone and you get an ad for it later and everyone's like, my phone is listening. What's really scary is they don't have to listen. And in fact, they don't listen. They just know. People do not realize how much they're tracked online. There's a thing called keystrokes, which is essentially like every time you click on a keyboard, what letter you're clicking or where in the app you're clicking. People think maybe like if I don't like a video, they won't know I like it. Not the case. They're tracking exactly how long you're spending on any given section of the app down to the millisecond and using this as like a huge data machine to continue to feed you more of what you're going to stick around and watch. And so just imagine if you could use that level of understanding of humans and data in a way that's productive, finding common interests with other people or opportunities or things that you can actually go out and do in the real world, but instead is being used in the way of just keeping you online. But I think in our own lives, it really is just about like, I think especially the older you get, it's like how much time you're giving up.
Yeah.
Because assuming that is your most valuable resource, what are you spending that doing and what is that resulting in? And so, yes, getting everybody behind the idea of getting offline is potentially completely unrealistic. But finding like what we can exchange it out for and what else we can be doing for ourselves and like what our kids can be doing and how that shapes their development is really the important piece to ask.
One of the things we're really excited about is you'll have an opportunity to address our upper school students, middle and high school, in just a little bit. But then also to come back and you'll have an opportunity to talk to some of our parents. If there was just sort of one or two things that some people in either audience walked away and thought, all right, maybe I should try this. Or here's a practical step I should at least consider. What are those things that come to mind?
I think the biggest thing for the kids, for students, is it kind of comes back to that question of like, how am I using technology and how is it using me? And being able to have the awareness to identify that. Yeah. I think the best way you can do that is if you're struggling with it is step away for a period of time and come back to it. I think then it becomes very easy to realize what is silly about it and how you're wasting your time, or maybe what is not necessary. Especially students being able to practice that or even just gain awareness over the fact that it's not like just their fault. I think it's very easy, especially for parents and kids or teachers and kids, to have this tug of war between each other of like, you need to spend less time online, whatever. It's like, you don't understand me or social media, right? What is a much more helpful initiative is saying like, I, as a parent, struggle with social media use. You, as a student, struggle with it. Educators struggle with it. We all, as a collective, people struggle with this because of how it is built and designed against us. So instead of fighting each other, understanding each other's struggles and then looking at how it's made and then realizing that is the actual problem and the issue to solve or like the thing to develop a better relationship with is really key. So I think then speaking to the parents, it really becomes first of all, if you don't have a student that's, entering the later middle school years or high school years, or basically what I'm saying is if you haven't given your kid a phone or social media yet, like fighting that war as long as you can, like extending childhood as long as you possibly can is one of, as crazy as it sounds, like one of the most incredible parenting moves I think you can make in the modern day. It's gonna be really tough. Like I'm only, just a few years out of high school. And like, I know if I heard myself say that as a high schooler, I think it was the stupidest thing ever. But now, even just a few years later, I completely understand. And like, even though my parents only let me on social media at like the legal age of like, I think it's 13 or 14. And even though that's the recommendation from so many professionals to not let your kids use it until that age, it's like, I wish they waited till longer. Like, because when I know when I look at the apps, like let's take TikTok as an example, Snapchat too. Basically, the point I want to make is the less I used an app as a kid, the less I feel like attached to it now. Okay. So I don't have TikTok. I know people who spend so many hours on TikTok a day and feel like they can't step away from it. But because I never used it at a young age, I have absolutely no attachment to it. I don't care. Like I just don't even care to use it. Whereas Instagram, like because that was such a socially powerful and important thing for me as a 14-year-old, and because it became such a habit, that platform is something that like even now I find very difficult to step away from. So I think just being intentional about, if you can, again, fighting that war as long as you possibly can as a parent, having that like group mentality of like, we are in this together, we need to beat this. Cause like, I think maybe parents point the finger at their kids a lot, but it's like, if they check their own screen time, it might even be more than their kids. Like maybe not more, but like not incomparable.
Yeah.
I want to run with that idea a little bit. You put in kind of two categories. One is like, what do you tell the parent who their student does not have social media but comes up to them for the first time asking for a phone or for an account, a social media account? And you kind of let it as far as you can push that, do so. It's going to be the best recommendation. The other scenario, one that I have on my mind, I think you alluded to this. I wonder if you could just pull at that thread a little bit more, is the parent that has the child with social media, and even if the parent recognizes their own tendencies and maybe their own draw to social media and use of social media, what do you tell the parent, or how could you advise the parent that does see their child and see that it's the sort of scenario where the technology is beginning to control them, and how does that conversation, or how does that get delivered in a way that doesn't come off to the student, especially teenagers, as we're just creating this combative relationship?
Well, I think talks like what you guys are having me do is really powerful, simply because they're in an environment where they can't avoid it, right? Like, everybody's got to come show up to this thing.
That's right.
And it's nice because now the kids have somebody who is not a parent who's finger wagging them, not a teacher who's telling them they can't even have a phone, but somebody who's just a little older than them, who they can look up to and respect, not even telling them not to have it, but saying guys, I really struggle with this. This is tough. Everyone your age struggles with this. Here's why. Make your own decision. Gifting them that awareness that maybe they're not in full control. I'm convinced that, especially for kids, them making up their own mind about it is the only way that is powerful enough to initiate any kind of change. Sure. And so obviously that's really challenging to do as a parent or an educator alone. But again, having more resources where you put a kid in a situation where they can make up their own mind and they don't feel forced into that is a really, really powerful thing, especially in the circumstance where they are already using it and maybe are already struggling with it.
Sure. I appreciate you saying that in the sense of getting the awareness out there. I was wondering if there's anything on your end in terms of just the organization you work for and kind of seeing this, that you guys have probably been thinking about a very similar question, that you guys have kind of tackled this. What does that look like?
This one might seem silly, but one thing I remember my dad always doing is he would make me trade time. So if I wanted to play more video games past what my daily usage was supposed to be, he'd say, okay, for every I think it was every half hour I read, I could win a certain amount of time on a video game. Having some kind of exchange, basically, of doing something that the parent prefers their kid to do in exchange for them wanting to spend more time on it, which is great because I think that also contributes to overall them just spending less time on it instead of just having free range to do whatever. I think generally speaking, alternatives are huge. Snapchat as an example, Snapchat, this is the point we make in the talk, is just so incredibly unnecessary in how they design it to be addictive and gamified. Mm-hmm. But all it is a messaging platform. Kids use Snapchat in the same way that adults use messaging. And so with that in mind, it's just again, finding an alternative. All you're doing is group chats and sending photos. That functionality exists in iMessage and doesn't have hundreds of millions of dollars of developers trying to make it addicting.
Do you have other resources that you would point parents to, or students?
The Social Awakening, the organization who's responsible for organizing all these talks, just made a really great resource for parents. So if you look up the Social Awakening on their website, you'll find it very easily. And essentially, what parents can do is get in on, I forget if it's weekly or monthly Q&A calls, but just so everyone understands Max and why I keep bringing him up, he is slightly older than me, but he brings this really great perspective of being, he actually used to be somebody who designed the apps a decade ago, or so, however long. So he really understands fundamentally, from a technology standpoint, what goes into keeping you on the app and why that's so tough, especially for young minds. And so he's incredible at fielding questions, especially with parents about all that, because, again, I think he's a bit closer to their age demographic. So anyway, all that's to say, that's a fantastic resource, even for parents, just to learn what their kids are doing on these apps and what they're exposed to, because there's no easy way for you as a parent to find out without getting sucked into it yourself. And he has a great intro talk on there that's an hour long, going through what are your kids using this for? What are the issues with that? What are the benefits of that? What are the challenges or struggles? How can you address it as a parent? And then also, like I said, does those interval Q&A calls where anybody can kind of speak on their personal at-home experience and get some suggestions and advice.
And that's just going to socialawakening.com
.com
and kind of looking through that. Okay.
Forget if it's .org or .com, but Google's pretty good at this stuff, so they haven't figured it out. Yeah,
that's right. I was wondering if you could comment on just thinking about, I have a student with social media. What is the good I should be perhaps seeing? Is there anything that's very clearly like off bounds in terms of like restricting my students using social media? Is there just some that are just worse than others and probably just should be avoided?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think it's tough because like it's almost like if they have it already, we're kind of just making excuses for why it's okay that they have it, because I feel like in every sense with almost every platform, if they're not already on it, again, the advice is always just don't let them have it. And so it's tough to make excuses for it. For me to even give like positive reasons to have it when that's my recommendation, my honest recommendation. But I honestly, like I mentioned, I would make videos on all this stuff and post it online, and like obviously people who didn't agree with me would have plenty to say on it. That was one thing I remember hearing, especially from young people, is like, well, yeah, I get it, like social media is tough, but like what other problems are you creating for your kid by not letting them have it and like feeling like they're the only one who's left out and not understanding the language anymore, the terminology, or like being a part of their own culture? Again, this is why it's so tough, because like, yeah, I can understand that, but are you just saying, okay, fine, give my kid all the same problems that the other kids are going to struggle with just so they can not have FOMO? Like, I don't know if that's a good solution. So again, I think all of it just comes back to like awareness. I think the norm is that kids don't understand how it's being used against them.
Yeah,
that's the norm. So the more like we maybe as parents can have that organic conversation with the kids, especially before they have it, and kind of just make that conversation in general more normal to have with young people, is a great way forward. So that way they can, again, just kind of make their own decisions.
Yeah, that's really good.
So.
Well, Caleb, I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of the podcast, and I want to thank you, too, for being willing to be the inaugural Lyceum speaker. One of the things that, the term actually does have a pedigree in the United States. In the 1800s, there was a Lyceum series that was really kind of geared toward Americans on the ever expanding frontier, who may not have had a lot of opportunity for education, but who thirsted for good conversation about important topics, even into adult life. And, the old Lyceum series featured guys whose names you would know, Mark Twain, Abraham Lincoln. And so there is this old pedigree. And, we think that as a school, we not only have an opportunity to talk to students in K through 12, but also to parents. We really want this to be a community of learning, and a community of learning that extends to parents as well. We're all in it together. We really do take the partnership between parents and teachers and students seriously. And we think tonight is kind of an embodiment of that ideal, and we're glad that you're part of it. So
thank you.
Caleb, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Mr. Battaglia, always a pleasure.
Yep. It's good to be back on.
All right. Well, we hope you'll join us again for a future episode of Honoring the Honorable. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you for listening to Honoring the Honorable, a Seven Oaks podcast.